Do we have anybody else online? Anybody online at this point? Okay, but we're expecting Senator Clays to be online at some point. First order of business is approval of the minutes. Everybody had an opportunity to take a look at those. I'll take a motion. Senator Reddy.
We accept the minutes.
I have a motion to adopt the minutes. Is there a second? Second by Representative Waymaster. Discussion. Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Minutes are approved. We're going to move right in here and start with the presentations and welcome back to the committee. Mr. Volz, you're up.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate that. Thank you very much for your service to the committee, by the way, Senator Masterson. I appreciate that. Congratulations, Representative Waymaster, on your appointment to the committee chair. Today, we're going to share 8 Build Kansas Fund applications for final advice. Before we get started, I just want to make a couple of reminders about our process. This is part of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, as shorthand, or it's also known as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. You'll hear it called the IIJA occasionally. $1.2 trillion over 5 years. 60% of that is formula funds, 40% is discretionary grant funds, which is what we are going after with the Build Kansas Fund. We do have a rather extensive workflow process for the Build Kansas Fund. We do completeness reviews within our infrastructure hub office when people apply to the Build Kansas Fund. Once those are in good shape, we review and approve them in our steering committee, and we bring them here to the committee for final advice. Once that happens, then it's a waiting period. We have to wait for the actual grant to get approved by the federal government. And what I've circled there in red is the process that we just recently developed with the State Treasurer's Office, and I'll show that on this slide. It's also a complicated process, but we've been working with the State Treasurer's Office on this over the last few months, and we think we've got this down. And what this will allow is for local entities to get reimbursed from the Build Kansas Fund. So they have 2 ways to get reimbursed. They get reimbursed by the federal government, and then they get reimbursed for the match dollars by the Build Kansas Fund. So this is what that process details out. I'm not going to go through all this, just to let you know that we do have a process in place. And we actually have a draft agreement for the Build Kansas Fund. I just got that today from the State Treasurer's Office. And so we're close to getting our first Build Kansas Fund agreement processed. In this slide right here, just to remind you that the process for the applying for federal grants and applying for Build Kansas Fund runs somewhat in parallel. We do ask folks to submit their Build Kansas Fund application prior to the federal grant deadline, and that is done every time for all the applications, and then they submit their federal grant application, and then again, it's a waiting period. And we've got a lot of projects right now that are in the process of waiting for their federal award or notice of their federal award. Just so you know, the hub does not select projects. We give advice on projects, but we are not here to say yay or nay to a project or make approvals based on the merit of the project. And again, only Build Kansas funds are only awarded if that project is awarded a federal grant. All right, today we have 8 projects. These were reviewed by our steering committee on our meetings on May 1st and May 15th. We have 2 Grid Resilience and Innovation Program projects from the Flint Hills Rural Electric Cooperative. We have 3 airport infrastructure grants, 2 rural surface transportation grant programs, and then 1 water smart grant. And with that, I'll jump into this unless there's any questions.
You guys, any questions on the underlying? Actually, I had one quick one, what's on my mind. We see kind of the running tally of projects and things that are submitted and where we're at. Do you do a breakdown of the overhead piece, right? The $5 million and like contractual services and things like that? I noticed, I'd inquired of the treasurer, seems like contractual services is kind of this move through about the same amount. And I don't know that I've seen detail anywhere. Are you guys tracking what? I think the committee might be interested in that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we get monthly invoices from our consultant team. And right now for this fiscal year ending, we're at a $3 million balance on that invoicing at this point. Maybe just short of that. They got one more final invoice to submit to us. Next year, it's the budget we presented last time. And again, it'll be a $3 million contract with them. And then above and beyond that, we have roughly $1.3 million in administrative and overhead expenses for the infrastructure hub office itself.
And if you wouldn't mind just sharing what's kind of the breakdown as those come through, that'd be great. Any further questions? Seeing none, let's move right into
right.
projects.
All right, our first project, number 2024-041, this is the Flint Hills Rural Electric Cooperative. Again, this is the Grid Resilience and Innovative Partnerships Program. Program is designed to improve the grid infrastructure, to upgrade the grid infrastructure. They're asking from the Build Kansas Fund for $1,222,790, which will unlock $3,668,371. They're also contributing of their own money $584,019. So a total project cost of roughly $5.4 million. This project here will replace 71 miles of 80-year-old copper weld wire with aluminum wire. They'll also be upgrading poles, putting stronger poles in, decreasing span distances with this project. What it'll do is it'll essentially reduce physical failures of their system and create more carrying capacity of their system. This application was received on April 17th and approved by the steering committee. We're bringing it to you for final advice today.
Questions on this one? Senator Schallenberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just cautious about, we've not seen anything from electric co-op before, and I may have been under the false impression that this were cities and counties. And I would assume that there's a whole lot of rural electric co-ops out there that would love to have some free money. So I'm not sure why we're going down this road. I guess that's.
Yeah. Well, actually, we had several projects in April that we did approve. There was a program called the 4101D program, and it was another grid improvement program. And actually, several small rural electric cooperatives and city-owned utilities applied through that program. And they're, again, awaiting to determine if they received a federal award or not from the Department of Energy. But yeah, these rural electric cooperatives, that's who they primarily apply for through the DOE, is for these grid resilience improvement projects. Yep. So we had in April the 4101D program. Looks like we had 11 projects: Pioneer Electric Cooperative, City of Attica, Heartland Rural Electric Cooperative, Victory Electric Cooperative. That was City of Pratt, Horton, Garden City, Anthony, Blue Mound, and then the Ark Valley Electric Cooperative. So we've had kind of a mix, I would say, of cooperatives and city-owned cooperatives, power utilities that have applied in the past.
Further questions? Senator Reddy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not necessarily a question so much as a comment. I think some of these, well, I don't think we've ever laid out a specification who could not apply for it. But in as far as co-ops, I think it just makes good sense when they collaborate together for some of those communities, such as Marion and all of these ones, which may not be able to have a local match on their own without a co-op involved. So I think this is something that we didn't say they could not do. So it would be open to everybody. Thank you.
Right. Yeah, and ultimately, you got to think about it this way. I mean, the money that they're receiving from the Build Kansas Fund is money that they're not passing on to their customers and their ratepayers. I mean, so it is a savings for the ratepayers eventually.
So I noticed on here, so this one lists Flint Hills Resources with a $584,000 contribution locally on top of bill, but in the main app, it says behind that, if applicable. Yeah. Does that mean they may or may not contribute their portion of that?
I don't know what they meant by if applicable. I really don't. I can ask them. I was on the phone with them before we jumped in here, but we didn't talk about that portion of it.
Further questions, or Representative Hoffman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, that's what I was going to ask, because actually the 1.22 million is 33% of what they're asking for. So I mean, I appreciate them putting in the 500,000, but it's actually not matching the,
Yeah.
so I'm not, I guess when you write it up, the 584,000 is actually not part of the match for the money that they're asking for from the feds, so.
Yeah, so what's interesting about the way the Department of Energy does their grant programs, and they are different than every other federal agency out there. Okay, so they ask for 33% of the grant amount, whereas every other agency asks for a percentage of the total project value. DOE is the only one that does it that way, and it tends to sort of mess up the calculations for some of our smaller cooperatives when they do this calculation. In this case, they had applied and essentially their numbers didn't add up to their total project cost. And we explained that to them, and we said, really, you can only apply for this much of Build Kansas Fund. If your total project cost is $5.475 million, you're gonna have to make up that difference with your own funds. And so that's why they've added their own funds right here.
Okay, well, I mean, I don't have a problem with them adding their own funds, I just, it appears that they're using it as a match for that, and it really isn't necessarily. It's money above what they're asking for.
Yeah,
Just apples to oranges, maybe.
yeah, I would agree with you on that. And again, what we told them, based on their application, if they wanted to have that total project cost of 5.475, they were gonna have to make up that difference. So ultimately, they're asking for, 1/3 of their federal grant amount with Build Kansas Fund to supply that. But then anything above and beyond it that they needed to complete that project, they have to supply on their own, which may be why they said as applicable. They basically said, hey, if our project costs go above, we have to spend our own money, we'll do that.
Further questions?
But yeah, good question though. I mean, yeah.
So we'll move again without objection. Is there objection to 041? Okay, then we'll take a vote. So, actually, if we're gonna have split, I'll need to have a motion to accept. Is that Senator, Representative Hoffman?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll move that we accept the proposal.
Second by Senator Reddy. Hold on. And it's my understanding Representative Vaughn is online.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay. So we have motion to approve 041. There's been a second. Is there discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion passes. Do you wish to be recorded as a no? Okay. All right, we'll move on.
All right, next project is going to look very familiar. This is from the Flint Hills Rural Electric Cooperative, number 2024-042. And this again is being applied for the Grid Resilience and Innovative Partnerships Program. They're asking for $2,264,410 from the Build Kansas Fund. That will unlock $6,793,230 federal funding. Total project cost is $9,057,640. This project here is again through the Grid Resilience and Innovative Partnership Program to improve grid resiliency. This will similarly replace 60 miles of 80-year-old copper weld wire with aluminum wire. They'll be putting in new poles. They'll also be purchasing a portable substation supporting package. They have 6 substations right now. They have no backup power to any of these substations. And so this substation will act as a backup for them in case of failure or loss of one of those substations. Again, this is from the same electric cooperative. The previous one the project was in Chase and part of Marion County. This one is in Geary County. It's a pretty big electrical cooperative. But this application was received on April 17th prior to the federal deadline, and it was recommended for approval by the steering committee. And so we bring it to you today for final advice.
Questions on 042? Senator Schallenberger.
I'll shut up in a minute. So I don't see a local match here.
No.
It's a pretty good deal for them, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that's our rules right now. There is no requirement for a local match.
And bringing that up, that's part of our discussion today for those that have not looked further down on the agenda yet. So further questions on this one? I'll move back without objection, or you prefer a vote? Okay, we'll move on without objection. It's approved? Okay, I need a motion. Somebody, is there a motion on 042? Representative Hoffman.
Yeah, I'll move that we accept 042.
Is there a second? Second by Senator Reddy. Discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
I know, and I do want to be recorded on this.
Right, and Senator Schallenberger will be recorded as a no. We'll now move on to 044, it looks like.
Yep, This one here, number 2024-044, is from the City of Independence, and this is for an airport, FAA airport infrastructure grant. They're asking for $36,711 from the Build Kansas Fund, which will unlock $330,396 from the FAA for a total project cost of $367,107. It's a 90-10 split, so 90% federal money, 10% local money. And this will be to rehabilitate some asphalt and concrete portions of their runway, several taxiways, increase pavement life. This application was received on April 21st, reviewed by the steering committee on May 1st, and was recommended for approval. So we bring it to you today for final advice.
Committee discussion. Senator Reddy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We just recently in the legislature approved funding for airport infrastructure or maintenance and such. Would any of that apply to this type of ask?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with what got approved, so I wouldn't know right offhand.
Okay, I'm not sure either. So
Okay.
I just know we approved, I think, $15 million or $5 million per year or something like that.
Yeah, I think, long story short, that would be another pot. I mean, obviously, as an airport, they'd be eligible for those dollars. But this is just a separate pot in which that was requested. Further discussion? Seeing none. Objection on this one? Without objection, this one's approved. 045.
All right. So in Coffee County, number 2024-045, and this is another airport infrastructure grant from the FAA. It's very similar. They're asking for $44,445 from the Build Kansas Fund. That will unlock $400,000 in federal dollars for a total project cost of $444,445. This application, this will very similarly will rehabilitate asphalt and concrete portions of the runway, several taxiways, extend the life of the pavement. This was received by the Build Kansas Fund on April 22nd, reviewed by the steering committee on May 1st. And again, we bring it to you for final advice today.
Committee questions? Discussion? Objections? Seeing none, we'll approve. 046.
2024-046 is from Jackson County, and this is an application which is to the US DOT's Rural Surface Transportation Grant Program, otherwise known as Rural. In this project, they're seeking $6,587,490 from the Build Kansas Fund. That'll unlock $27,736,800 from federal dollars from the US DOT for a total project cost of $34,671,000. This project is focused on improving the safety on 9 segments of roadway in Jackson County and 1 intersection. Safety improvements that they're going to use this money for include striping, rumble strips, flattening slopes, delineators, guardrail, friction treatment, and 1 intersection realignment. This application was received by the Build Kansas Fund on April 25th. It was reviewed by the steering committee on May 6th and then recommended for approval. So it comes to you today for final advice. And they are contributing, I should note, they are contributing a portion of the money, of their own money, towards this project. It ends up being $346,710, which if you do the quick math, that's 1% of the total project cost.
Committee questions? Senator Schallenberger.
All right,
Oh, you're good?
you're ahead of me. How many miles is this? Is this all on 75 highway? Do you
Now,
know?
this is various segments in Jackson County. It's sort of spread around the entire county.
And the feds approved one grant to cover all those parts? Haven't
Well,
approved it yet, but
yeah, they haven't approved it yet, but yeah, they could potentially approve it. These rural programs, fairly umbrella. You can apply for just about anything, as long as it's in a rural area. This particular grant has to be within a rural, designated rural area. But yeah, you can apply for just about any type of improvement to transportation with this grant.
that's 34 million is a lot of
Money, yes.
thanks.
Further questions, comments, objections? Seeing none, considered approved. 047.
2024-047 is from the city of Dodge City, and this is the same program, US DOT's Rural Surface Transportation Grant Program. This is an 80-20 match. Dodge City and Ford County are both kicking in funds towards this. They're asking for Build Kansas funds of $7,620,280. That will unlock $40,641,492 in federal dollars for a total project cost of $50,801,866. And again, Dodge City and Ford County are both participating with $1,270,047 each. This project is got multiple elements to it. I'll give you the name of the project. It's called the Removing Barriers to Elevate Rural America. And the reason they say removing is because it has an impact on the new dairy plant south of Dodge City. And basically what they're going to be doing is they're going to do a bridge expansion over the BNSF Railroad from 2 lanes to 4 lanes. They're going to be doing some intersection improvements, turn lanes, signals, and some multi-use trails in this area. This Build Kansas Fund application was received on April 29th. It was reviewed by our steering committee on May 1st, and we bring it to you today for final advice.
Committee questions? I'm glad to see this one has $2.5 million of local match, not identified as if applicable. Any further questions? Objections? Seeing none, consider that approved. 049.
2024-049 is from the city of Girard, and this is the U.S. Department of Interior's Water Smart Planning and Project Design Program. In this one here, they're applying for $91,626 in Build Kansas funds. This will unlock $274,878 in federal dollars for a total project cost of $366,504. This project is a 75-25% match with the Department of Interior. It's going to be using treated lagoon effluent to irrigate their municipal golf course and basically allowing the city to reduce their potable water costs that they're using for irrigation now, reduce their water costs in general, and potentially allow them to sell potable water to other agencies and cities around the area. So it's a sort of economic incentive program for them to be able to do this, to be able to use this water from their effluent lagoons. It will be treated before it is sprayed on the golf course or used at the golf course for irrigation.
Committee questions? Senator Reddy.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So it's for a golf course, so they can reduce their fees from the city and have their own, but then you said they would sell it.
Yeah, there's a potential for them to be able to take excess water that's already been treated for drinking. Rather than use it for irrigation, they can sell that water to other agencies nearby.
So is that a for-profit? Is that?
Oh, I mean, I don't know if I'd say it's for profit. I mean, it will go back to the city coffers.
So the city would sell it?
It's a
City
municipal
would sell it,
course,
yes.
right?
Yes.
The course is municipal. The
Okay.
course is municipal.
That was like a private.
Yeah.
sale. All
Yep.
right, that makes more sense. Thank you.
Further questions? Comments? Objections? Seeing none, considered approved. We'll move on to the last one, 050.
2024-050, City of Emporia, and similarly, they're applying for an FAA Airport Infrastructure Grant. They're asking for $49,889 from the Build Kansas Fund. This will unlock $449,000 in federal dollars for a total project cost of $498,889. The Airport Infrastructure Grant Program is a 90-10 match program, so they're asking for essentially the 10% match. This project here will be used again for replacing existing runway lighting and some circuit systems at the airport. This was received on May 13th. It was reviewed by our steering committee on May 15th, and we bring it to you today for final recommendation.
Committee questions? Senator Reddy.
So when you say federal 90 and local 10 and the city doesn't have 10, the local we're talking about is from Build Kansas?
Correct, yes.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, in federal language, local means anything from state and below.
Further questions or comments? Representative Waymaster.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So on the final page in regards to the budget, they've already received an FAA grant?
There's
Or they're applying?
so there's two different programs that they're using. There's the Airport Infrastructure Planning Grant money, which is allocated to all the airports in the state. And so they're combining the funding together to create their total project cost.
So was there any discussion, or did they indicate what would happen if one of those grants was not approved?
The Airport Infrastructure Planning Grant, I think, is money that they've already been allocated.
Okay.
Yep. But it's a little, from what I was talking with our airports director at KDOT, it's such a little amount of money each year that they actually end up having to sort of build it up to use it for any one project. So they get a little bit allocated each year, but they're allowed to sort of bank it and save it and then use it on projects after that.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Francis.
When you had that conversation with them, do you know what the existing KDOT Airport Improvement Program requires for a match?
I do not. But we'll find out. Get back to you. Thanks, Catherine.
All right, committee, further questions, comments? Representative Hoffman.
It's just a comment. I'm just wondering when we're going to get to the point where we're seeing these before they actually, we're getting closer. Looks like the federal deadline on most of these was May 31st. So when are we going to get to the point where we're seeing them before they actually have to send them in?
Yeah, I would like to see that as well. We get a few of these every round, which they send them in on the day of or a couple days before the applications actually due, which is our only requirement, that they send them in before they send the federal grant application in. Again, the process, typically the process is that, or what it should be anyways, is that they would send us a Build Kansas Fund application. We would approve it at the steering committee level. We would approve it at the advisory committee level. And then we would send them a letter saying, hey, the Build Kansas Fund is going to support your project with these matching funds. And typically they would attach that to their application that they submit to the federal government. Now our process just lags. It just does. And I've yet to see, well, it's only been a few where they've actually had that letter in hand and been able to attach that to their application. Our process is long, and what I tell folks to do is to commit to the funding. So they have to turn in a letter of funding commitment with these grant applications saying that, hey, we will supply that local match dollars if you supply all these federal dollars. So I tell them to do is write your letter of commitment as if you, the city or the county or whoever's applying, is going to supply those match dollars. And then later, if we follow up with a letter from the Build Kansas Fund, you can submit that to the federal government as an addendum, if you like, or just keep it in your file. And if you do get approved for the federal grant, just know that the Build Kansas Fund will, follow through on their commitment to supply that match dollar.
Right, but so are you not getting, I think I understood you said that you're not getting the applications until just a little bit before they have to send them in.
Yeah.
So I think there's the breakdown. They really should be sending those in to you quick enough it can go through the process. And I mean, right now, it's just kind of we're giving them the money even though they've already applied.
Yeah.
And I just think we've got to figure out how to get that working. I mean, we're still in the first year. July 1st, we'll start a new year of money and we've got to figure out how to make that happen. And it sounds like to me, it may need to be from your office to the entities, we need these quicker. And maybe there's a deadline change that needs to be done. If we don't get them a certain amount of time, then we're not going to receive them.
Right, and we encourage folks to get their applications in early, and everybody I talk to, everybody our extension team talks to says, get them in early. Even if your numbers are not set or solid yet, get your application in so that we can get you a funding commitment letter, because that would help them out tremendously on their applications. Now, the other problem, of course, with this is the federal cycle for these grants is sometimes very short. The fuse is very short. Some of these grant programs will only have 60 days from announcement to application is due. All right, so that gives them a very short amount of time to, number one, get organized, start their application, start figuring out what their budget is, put their application into the Build Kansas Fund, steering committee approves, advisory committee approves. Pretty soon, we're already beyond that 60-day window. And so part of the problem is they're not getting them in on time. I agree there. Part of the problem is the federal grant windows, the federal grant fuses, if you will, are just so short, and they have to react so quickly that it makes it very tough.
Well, let's see if we can.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
All right.
Do they then attempt to supplementally provide information, right? So now we have them approved in those situations where they try to amend their application or supplement and provide this additional information? Is that?
Yeah, in some cases, they're allowed to do that. In some cases, they're allowed to send in letters of support, say from a senator or representative after the fact. But yeah, they could try to amend it. Whether it'll make a difference as far as the federal government is concerned, as far as approving or denying their applications, hard to say. But it definitely helps to show that funding support. So we encourage them, try to amend their application if they can.
Senator Reddy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So these are the ones we've seen that the steering committee has approved. Were there others that were applied that the steering committee didn't approve? Because that goes back to the question, we are seeing things that maybe you've already vetted that came to us. And of course, they don't even receive the funding till they're done granted by the federal agencies. So have there been ones that the steering committee said, hey, these don't meet requirements? So even if they're going for a federal program, it didn't even come to us because you've already denied it. Therefore, they can seek out other local options, I suppose.
Right. So again, the steering committee and the infrastructure hub, we do not approve or deny projects based on the merit of the project. There's only been one that we have declined so far, and that was because they turned it in late. They turned it actually after the federal deadline. And that was one of our rules, they have to have it turned in before the federal deadline. So that is the only one that we've actually declined.
All right, committee. Now I've lost track. Did we approve that last one? Or am I still on that? All right. So, there are more questions? Kind of got a little off subject there. Senator Clays is on now. All right. Just in time, Senator Clays, for this last one. Any discussion? Objections? Seeing none, consider it approved. You are in time for the next item on the agenda is discussion that was requested by the committee on local match. And I'll just open up the floor for that. Anybody wish to contribute to that conversation? Representative Waymaster.
Well, and, actually, during the last legislative session, we tried to require a match, and it ultimately was vetoed. I do have a question here that is on the PowerPoint, and it says, we do ask to investigate ARPA funds use. Funds use regarding what? How they maybe funded projects within their communities, or if you're asking if they have ARPA funds available that can be used as a local match?
Correct, the latter. So we do ask them to check, see if they have ARPA funds that can be used for a local match before they apply to the Build Kansas Fund. And, most of the applicants say, yes, we've checked and we don't have any ARPA funds to use for a local match, or we've already committed our ARPA funds or obligated our ARPA funds for other uses. So it is a question that we do ask them to make sure that they've used their ARPA funds. The ARPA funds is kind of a question we've been asking or talking with the recovery office about. And they're only accounted for once per year at the federal level. So it's very hard to track how the cities are using their ARPA funds. And the key is they have to have them obligated by the end of this year, and they have to have them spent by the end of 2026. So we've been trying to encourage the cities, hey, make sure you're using your ARPA funds either as a match for a federal grant, or you're using it for a water program or a street program, or using it for something so you don't lose those funds. But, we've been talking with the recovery office, and they're doing the same thing, though. I mean, they're trying to encourage, all the municipalities in Kansas to make sure they use all their ARPA funds this year as well, or at least obligate them by the end of this year.
I would say this is, oh, sorry, Mr. Chair, kind of an issue with the federal government if they're going to allow federal money that was given to communities to use as a federal match for another grant.
Yeah.
I just find that a little odd. I think for the discussion, and this is obviously something as Representative Hoffman mentioned, we're in the first year kind of going through all these applications, and I think, and I don't know what, I have to talk to Jill, how we could go about requesting a local match, because, I know this was brought up by Senator Clays at one of our previous meetings, and he made some very valid points that if you're applying to utilize the funds that is in Build Kansas, I do think that the local cities, communities, and electric cooperatives as well need to have some skin in the game. Instead of submitting an application with a 0% local match and then wanting their match for the federal grant to come directly from the Build Kansas Fund. But that's the discussion we're having. I don't know legislatively. I guess it's a question for Jill. Can we stipulate in this committee a percentage for a local match?
I think just to put it would be more of, we obviously don't have the power of statute, right? So it would be more of a committee policy, like a committee rule, right? That says we as a committee wouldn't consider applications that come before us that didn't have some type of match. I think probably how that would manifest itself. But Jill, do you have any comments on that? Or?
I think you can do that. I think the question becomes then, let's just follow this through, that the hub, the group is an eligible entity. The hub says yes, you're an advise and consult group. So I think you say you won't consider them with any rules. You've still been advised and consulted. And so I think it's up to the state treasurer whether they ultimately say you've advised and consulted and you said no, so I'm going to say no, or they say you advised and consult, but we think we should fund it anyway, and then they do it. Because I think your action of setting a rule or policy, you can do that. That is under your purview as a committee. But then I think the ultimate question is what the state treasurer does with that advice, since you are an advise and consult group.
Well, state treasurer's a pretty good guy, so he'd probably follow along with the committee's recommendation. Senator Schallenberger.
I'm sure he'd love our opinion. In my previous life, I was a mayor of a small, poor town. And so as president, I had conversations about this before it started. And most of the grants that we applied for were state grants. We can't use this money. So we would get a $10 million grant to improve 3 blocks of Main Street, and it would require $1 million local, and we didn't have the million. So we're not letting those grants go forward because they require a local match. But you got here and get a $34 million federal deal, and you don't put any skin in the game. So I'm a advocate there should be something. I am aware that it's hard for locals to raise money. It's just mill levies, and everyone's broke. So I'm compassionate in that regard. But electric co-ops have no problems raising money. So I think we need to work something out here, or otherwise we're just going to be deluged.
Yeah, to the point, it's some entities are obviously going to have more capacity than others. I actually have Representative Vaughn with the hand up online.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to, I mean, kind of as a counterpoint to the former senator's points that he made, with small communities, I would be really hesitant to require a match if they currently do not have the means to provide that match for these funds, just because these are really once in a lifetime federal funds that we have to improve these local communities and really help them. So in particular, for very small communities that may not otherwise have the means to access these federal grants, I would be really hesitant to put any kind of requirement for local match. But I do understand the desire to do that for communities with means that would be able to provide that match. So I guess I just add that I think there's a balance here, and I hope that we consider the small communities as we make this decision, because I do think these are once in a lifetime federal dollars that we want to invest across the state, and in particular in small communities that may not otherwise have the means to carry out these types of projects.
Senator Reddy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I was just thinking, I don't know what kind of enforcement this committee has. I think we can recommend and suggest, we can put in any kinds of stipulations we want, if we want the matches to be 10%, 5%, 1%, whatever it might be. But if we're looking at giving money back to communities, and there's a steering committee that has reviewed these, no matter how many regulations we put, I just don't know how far that would go. And the other piece to this is there are communities that are waiting for federal funds. And I think my original thought was this committee, the state funds were set up so they can be used as a local match, that there wasn't a requirement for their own cities and counties to put in a match, that this state was going to be the local match for the federal funds. So that was my thought process during this piece. Now, if communities wanted to put in a certain percentage, that was certainly acceptable, but I thought that was the original intent. Thank you.
Representative Francis?
You know, I see two problems with what we've done, or the way this process is working is, I do think it's important that everybody have skin in the game. I'm not saying it's got to be a 10 or a 20% match, but there should be some skin in the game. And we see that throughout even our state grants. You know, the cost share program that KDOT has, which is incredibly popular, has a 15% non-state cash match. The airport funding that we just increased has a minimum of 5% cash match. But one of the other problems I have, I think we're already oversubscribed for last year if all of the applications were approved, which I understand we don't know what our track record is going to be on that. Yeah. But, you know, for instance, today we approved how many $1 million worth of
74 so far.
74 million so far, and we have, is it 50 a year?
Yeah, 50 a year, yeah, $50 million.
50 a year. You know, another thing that I think we ought to somewhat consider is a maximum state match per application so that we don't just blow through it. Because I do agree some of our smaller communities need more help. Just my thought.
I have Senator Clays, are you on with your hand up?
I am, thanks. Yeah, just to build off of that, there are a finite number of dollars that are available to match any of these. And I can say with some authority that there are a couple of these in here that have a zero match where the communities had money set aside to match. They chose not to because they don't have to. And what that did is it made less of our state dollars available to other communities to draw down more federal dollars. And that's why it makes sense to have at least some level of match, whether it affects small communities or not. We can make that determination of how much any size of community should have to match, but maybe it's just that we say there needs to be a match. A match. You can throw in $100,000, throw in 100. If you can put in $1 million, put in $1 million. But we can be more of a entity that can review that and take a look and say, well, that's a community of 5,000 people. Maybe $10,000 is all they can throw in. That's fine. Let's move on to the next one. We see a community of 20,000 people and they're putting in $100,000, $400,000, $500,000. Great. You know, a community of 50,000 plus and they're putting in $1 million towards a project. Looks great. Let's move on. But if we're starting to see this where a community that has already set aside money for this and then they chose not to put that in there because they don't have to, that's where we should start saying, okay, that's not an adequate application and we need to send it back for review. This doesn't have to be something where we set something in stone where it's, you know, this marker and that marker. Let's just ask everyone to have some level of match in their application from this point forward, and we can evaluate those as we go. Whether or not we have any authority over that or not, I think will be up to the state treasurer. But as was said, the state treasurer, I believe, has been committed to working with us on what recommendations we put forward. So my suggestion at this point would just be to notify everyone that they should have from this point forward some level of match included inside that, because what's happening now is not going to draw down more federal dollars. It's going to draw down less. And that's not what this was intended to do. And fewer communities will receive grants because we've done it this way, where we are allowing people to not have any skin in the game. So skin in the game equals more projects, more federal dollars drawn down, more usable state dollars to affect those projects. That would be my 2 cents.
Senator Reddy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It looks like we're looking for some type of match. If we can get options on what that match might look like, does it have to be dollars? Are there other options to what might qualify as a match for some of these communities? So I would like to have that discussion if we are going to go down the path of having some kind of match.
So I think what I'm hearing is, and I think is there's a fairly broad consensus amongst the committee to have at least a guideline that would state there needs to be some type of skin in the game, not necessarily put a certain percentage or marker or even necessarily cash or in kind on it, because it's, you know, taking in consideration everything from the small poor town to the co-op, right? That it's for this committee to decide. I do agree that, I mean, this committee's power lies in its relationship with the treasurer and the legislature's broader authority to appropriate or rescind appropriation. So that, I think what might be good is for us to develop somewhat of a guideline for the committee that we could put out, and we could work to do that. I'll work with we'll see. Another little changing factor is after June 30, so July 1, the chairmanship will shift to the House, and you'll have Chairman Waymaster. So maybe our offices will work together to try to put kind of our idea of a guideline together for at the next meeting, the new chairman to present. It would be an idea. It's Representative Francis.
I would also say that we ought to consider the fact that some of the entities applying are revenue producing, like electric co-ops, city utilities that actually should have infrastructure upgrade program in place. That ought to be a consideration at least.
Yeah. You're talking about entities that have revenues outside of tax collections. Right. And so, okay, so if that's amenable with the committee, don't necessarily need to take an action today, but we'll have the offices work together, try to put some guidelines together to further advise moving forward, and probably also have some productive conversations with the state treasurer on that relationship. And anything else for the good of the order?
Mind if I make some comments?
Yeah, Matt, please.
So right now, we're not turning anyone away due to lack of funds. You mentioned that we've approved $74 million, and today we're actually another $17 million in applications. So the chances of those getting approved for federal grants down the road, it's actually somewhat small. To date, we've only committed $2.6 million worth of the Build Kansas Fund. Now, part of that is the fact that it's just such a long cycle for these federal awards. But we also know not everybody's going to be successful in these grants. So I guess I would say, keep in mind that we're not turning anyone away right now. We're still okay as far as the Build Kansas Fund. We're still have money in there to provide these matches. I did some research on other states that are similar. There's only really a handful of states that do what Kansas does with the size of the program that we have with the Build Kansas Fund. I checked with Minnesota. They don't have any requirement for a local match. They fund all of the federal match requirement. New Mexico has no requirement. Colorado has no requirement. North Dakota does have a requirement, but they also do selection too. So they're actually choosing projects. But like I said, it's only a handful of states that have a program similar to this, to what we have here in Kansas. So people really are not doing this, and having this requirement that folks provide a local match. And at the end of the day, you know, really, it's an investment by the state to garner as much federal dollars as we can. You know, are we going to be producing some sort of discouragement for people to apply to the Build Kansas Fund by saying you must provide a match? Are there entities that we're sort of going to be biased against, you know, larger entities or what we think are well-to-do communities? Or are we trying to target rural communities? I actually did some research and looked at what we have. You know, somebody brought up the county size of 20,000 and the city size of 50,000. And I just did some mapping real quick through the state of Kansas. And what's up on the screen right now, that's all the counties right now that are greater than 20,000. So, I mean, you know, they cover a large swath of the rural parts of Kansas. So that really wouldn't hit on all of rural Kansas. At 50,000, it sort of reduces a little bit more to 10 counties. 100,000, it's just a handful of counties, 5 counties. And then if you look at cities that are less than 5,000 population, well, you can see that's all over the state of Kansas. And the ones that are greater than 5,000 is again, just 64 of them, but again, they're spread across Kansas as well. I guess my recommendation, or our recommendation, would be that we for now, we don't have a requirement for a local match until we get to the point where we're seeing this cash flow issue, where we're going to be potentially turning away applicants for Build Kansas Fund. Right now, we're nowhere near that. Again, we've only committed $2.6 million so far of the money that we've got right now.
Further comment, Senator Schallenberger.
Well, we have contingent liability, and I'm a banker, and we can't go out there, and we're not Southwest Airlines selling the seat 3 times. We can't go past what we are obligated to go. Can we? I mean, I would think that would not be a very fiduciary way of doing things. Even though $2 million's gone, we've obligated $75 million plus 15 more, so.
Right, right. And what we're doing, so as some of these applications are starting to get reviewed by the federal government right now, we're starting to see these awards come in. Again, we've only seen 8 awards come in so far out of all the ones that we've approved, the Build Kansas Fund. But you'll start to see more come in that will get awarded, but you're also going to see a lot more rejections too. So that'll start to actually decrease that pre-obligation amount as well. So we'll kind of, I mean, we'll obviously be tracking that and accounting for that and making sure that we're not
Any
going to be
rejections
over-accounting.
of any size yet?
Of any size, there's been one for 399,000 and another one for 10 million. So yeah, so they're fairly good sized. Yep.
How would you respond to, because I thought Senator Clay's had a good point in the sense of, you know, if no one's putting in local match and they have the capacity, you're eating up your build funds faster and actually theoretically to serve fewer communities.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, I would challenge you to find a city that's going to say, hey, we've got $10 million sitting around and we don't have any use for it anywhere else in the city. You know, we ask that question of them all the time. We say, you know, what else could you contribute to this? You know, or do you have funds to contribute to this match dollars versus using Build Kansas funds? Well, of course, they're going to say, hey, you know, we've got a street to repave or we have a sewer system to replace. You know, their list of priorities, I'm sure, is this long and their ability to do it is only so much.
Probably more applicable in the small town community, right, where you're
Yeah, for sure.
for a couple $100,000. I mean, if you got, you know, 10 little communities and they have $200,000, they commit none of it. Right? That's $2 million they got eaten up out of your build grant that could have gone to 10 other small town communities. So,
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I understand. We'll work on the okay. Final comments, Senator Reddy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I remember one of our first discussions when we set up this advisory committee. There are other communities already applying for these grants that don't have to go through the state. They're already doing it with their match from their communities. I believe the intent originally for this committee was for those communities that couldn't do that, that they didn't have money in the bank to put up their own match for it. So this state funds were going to be considered that local match for those communities, because not all of these businesses or cities or counties are going through us. The ones that can't put in a huge local match are probably going through us. And I think that, my understanding was that was the reason we were setting this up, was for those communities that could not do that on their own.
And I think that's true, but I mean, to the point that if you have little cities that have some capacity, for each one that doesn't, that has capacity, the other community that also can't is pushed out, defeating the purpose of what was originally there. And my apologies, I thought, Senator Clays, I missed your hand. I'm going to give final comments to you.
Yeah, I just had a clarifying question. You had said that as we get to the end, you would then change the rules. I want to make sure I caught that. So if we've expended a certain amount of money and we start seeing that we don't have enough money to actually cover all of the projects that are out there that we're capable of funding of the 200 million. So this is the 4-year program. We're getting towards the end. There are more of the projects are out there than what we can afford to fund. Then we would change the rules on it. Then we would start looking at whether or not we needed to have a local match. Is that what you were saying? Because I'm trying to understand how having some level of local match from these entities that are seeking money from the state to close the gap on a local match, that those cities can't put money in. For instance, there is a county and a city that both had 500,000 each set aside, ready to put in a match for projects in their area that they then came to us to create the rest of the match for, because they were sizable projects. They decided to put in 0 at my request because there's no reason for them to do that. Why would they do that? We can just cover it. Well, the reason that they would do that is because that 500,000 has already been set aside for that project. And then that $1 million now is sitting in our $50 million a year, $200 million fund, and is capable of then matching other community projects in communities that cannot afford it. So the advocacy here is actually for the smaller towns, for those who cannot afford the local match, and it is requiring those who can to actually put some skin in the game. And I'm just trying to understand and wrap my mind around why that is objectionable to you, and that you would rather have us be in a position where we are emptying the $200 million fund potentially faster than the 4-year period of time, and we don't require a match from those who can afford it.
Yeah. Well, number one, I want to make sure that we do, use up this fund. I don't want to have any funds remaining at the end of it. Right now, we're not on pace to use up all $200 million. I mean, again, it's all part of this slow federal cycle, and I know these numbers are going to increase. But right now, I'm trying to find ways to use the Build Kansas Fund as effectively as possible. There's definitely, though, a lot of entities, though, I think we could automatically say, hey, we're not going to require a match of you. If you're a disadvantaged community, or you're an area of persistent poverty, or you're a tribal community, no, we're not going to require a Build Kansas Fund match of you, right? And then, how do we answer that question about who do we require a match, who do we not require a match of? That's the hard part. Are we going to start digging into their financial records? No, I mean, that's just going to be too much of an effort for anyone to do. Do we do it based on size of the county or size of the community? That's one way to do it. Doesn't really tell you anything about their financial stability, or their ability to pay. But, and again, we could possibly do it. But again, it would just be something we have to answer these questions, and we have to think about them thoughtfully before we make that decision.
All right, committee, a lot to talk about. So my agenda is done, and we are adjourned.